right, can you guys hear me okay? All right. So one thing I want to do real quick is, thanks to my wife, she squared me away. But apparently, I tried to look on the first week. Um, I had a problem pulling up the videos of the class. But so I said that Mosul. I was talking about Mosul. That was on the Euphrates. It's on the Tigris River. So um, no, Mosul. Mosul. So I was talking about Mosul and whatnot. So Masada is we talk about the rocks of En Gedi and everything else. Remember we talked about that. So so anyway, I just want to clear that up. All right. So last week we ended at where Abram gave Lot the opportunity to pick and choose where he wanted to go, um, and so Abram, we talked about how that was odd, not kind of, but it was odd. Normally it would be Abram telling Lot where he was going to go, but he gave Lot the opportunity to pick for himself. And so, we talked about the valley, the Jordan Valley, which was rich, very luxuriant, a lot of vegetation. It's the sweetest spot of the area, based on what we read in Genesis, where it talked about the area being like the Garden of Eden. And so he chose it. And so as a result, Lot's heart went out to the area after it. And of course, at that time, it was clear that he was unmindful of the character of the inhabitants that lived in that area. um, and his ideas and his goals and his aims, we'll see later, will go bad. But yet God continues to watch, like over Abraham, he watches over Lot. And he doesn't leave Lot to eat the bitter results of his choice that we're going to see. So I'm going to start off with Genesis chapter 13. The goal is to hopefully get to 19. We'll see if we make it that far. But we're going to start with Genesis chapter 13, and I'm going to read verses 14 through 18. And the Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, lift your eyes now and look from the place where you are, northward, southward, eastward, and westward. For all the land which you see I give you and your descendants forever. And I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth, so that if a man could number the dust of the earth, then your descendants also could be numbered. Arise, walk in the land through its length and its width, for I give it to you. Then Abram moved his tent and went and dwelt by the Tabernacle trees of Mamre, which are in Hebron, and built an altar there to the Lord. All right, so as we see here in the verse very beginning, we see that Abram wasn't left in that hour without consolation. So God was with him. And God, like always, was with him and with all of us. And so, and to break this down a little bit, I don't know what Abram was thinking, but apparently he needed, it was probably during a time where he saw for himself what Lot saw. And God reassured Abram that everything that he could see in the 360 degrees, northward, eastward, southward, and westward, that he would be, that God would take care of him. And so, at this point in time, God once more renewed to him and enlarged the promise of all the land and all the things and the blessings that he'd be given. And as far as he could see, as far as his eye could range, he knew that God reassured him that he would give it to Abraham and his seed forever. And so Abraham took the possession of the promised land by faith, in which God obviously at this point in time had directed him to walk through it. So in verse 18, and then Abram moved his tent and went and dwelt by the tabernacle tree of Mamre, which are in Hebron, and built an altar there to the Lord. So during his wandering, Abram reached Hebron, which in research I found that there were a number of ancient cities there, and that's where he decided to pitch his tent under the spreading tabernacle tree and built the altar. And in that area of Mamre, it's actually a forest. And so he built his altar in the forest of Mamre. And that place, Hebron, continues when you read throughout the book, the rest up until all about Abraham. Hebron continues throughout Abram's life to be the center of his movement and everything that he does in that area. All right, so I'm going to move on to Genesis 14, chapter 14, verses 1 through 16. I don't think I'm going to read it. I'm going to summarize it, and then I'm going to go back and touch up on certain parts of it. All right, let's see. Go back here. I think I'm missing a map. Okay. I am missing a map. That's all right. So we see up here where Lot goes, the blue arrow, the arrow kind of right here. So it talks where Abraham is. And then this is, Lot's going to be in this area right here. And so the blue arrow kind of represents Lot moves into Sodom. And then, of course, this area here, hopefully we're going to get to that point. And we're going to talk about Lot's, after what happens after Sodom and Gomorrah. All right, so Genesis 14, chapter 14, verses 1 through 16. It's long, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to summarize it here. So Lot leaves. So then during this time, meanwhile, he took his family to live in the district, which is like the rest of Canaan, at the time of Joshua's conquest. And so that area was subdivided amongst several small kings. All right, and each king had ruled over his city and the area surrounding it. So a lot of times when you think about these areas, the kings, they ruled the areas and these villages and the built-up areas. They ruled the areas surrounding it, but they didn't have control over it. All right, and so if throughout history, it's always been the same way. If you go back to the Bedouin culture, and again, you've heard me talk several times about before the lands, the boundaries, and the countries were actually established. Bedouins moved from Iraq to Syria to Turkey to Iran, wherever, and they moved based on the seasons and the environment in which they raised their flock. And made a living. And so during this time, if you go from read from anything from the 18th to the 19th centuries to 20th century, early 20th century, you see that these people lived kind of like the same way. So a lot of what you saw, the way they lived then, and in some cases, the way they live now, they're still Bedouin culture. They lived much the same way. So. But during these times, Wilfred Thesiger wrote about it, and other travelers during the 1800s, late 1800s wrote, I forgot the guy's name. It's a famous guy that wrote about these areas and whatnot. But he talked about before they moved to an area, they would go and meet with a ruling party. There's also a name for them that's in Arabic. I forgot. But anyway, so that they would go in these areas, and they ruled the areas. They would provide them protection and whatnot. But even though they were in charge, they didn't actually have direct influence. And in many cases, by force or by some element of a grouping of men that getting together, they would have to go and enforce the ruling by force. But anyway, so during this time of Abram, there were several kings, I guess each probably ruling over a city and the immediate surrounding area. And so for 12 years, that whole district paid tribute to Chedorlaomer, if I'm not saying it. So there's some pronunciations pronounce it with a CH, others pronounce it with a K. Chedorlaomer. So this man was a king, and everybody within that district paid tribute to him. So in the 13th year, everything was up until the 13th year, everything was going good. Then they all rebelled. In the 14th year, the hordes of Chedorlaomer, as a matter of fact. The hordes of Chedorlaomer right there. So he had 3 confederates that followed him, and so they swept over the area, and they swept over the area and all the intervening districts, and with them they carried death and destruction and desolation. And so they were able to do what they were doing until they countered the 5 allied monarchs in the Valley of Siddim. The map I was looking for had talked about the Valley of Sim and whatnot, but in the district after on, which later on became the Dead Sea, and so the Genesis, this part of Genesis talks about the area that, like I said, that would now be called the Dead Sea. So in going back, I'm going to start with that's what I just did. I just basically summarized Genesis chapter 14, verses 1 through 16, and I'm going to go back to verses 5 and 6 to kind of just break this down. In the 14th year, Chedorlaomer and the kings that were with him came and attacked Rephaim and Ashtaroth, Kirianim, Zuzim and Ham, the Emim and Shaveh, Kiriathim, and the Horites in their mountain of Seir as far as El Paran, which is by the wilderness. So when I did some research, I was trying to break this down a little bit and whatnot. So basically, the kings traveled southward in the Transjordan, first conquering 3 tribes. So those 3 tribes, what this told us, it kind of explains the tribe and where they came from. But the tribes were Rephaim and Emim, which these people were very tall. They were giants. And actually in Deuteronomy chapter 3, verse 11, relating all the way back to King Og. And so it describes these people as being super, super tall. King Og himself was described as being 9 cubits. Now, I was trying to figure out exactly how big or how long or how tall is 9 cubits, and it's anywhere from 12 to 14 feet. But 12 feet tells you that these people were very, very big, very, very large. Then going into verse 13 through 24, this is about Lot's captivity, and then, of course, later on, his rescue. All right, so I'm going to read verses 13 to 24. The one who escaped came and told Abram, the Hebrew, for he dwelt by the tabernacle trees of Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Eshcol, and the brother of Aner, and they were allies with Abram. Now when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his 318 trained servants who were born in his own house and went in pursuit as far as Dan. He divided his forces against them by night, and he and his servants attacked them and pursued them as far as Hobah, which is north of Damascus. So he brought back all the goods, and also brought back his brother Lot and his goods, as well as the women and the people. And the king of Sodom went out to meet him at the valley of Shaveh, that is the king's valley, after his return from the defeat of Chedorlaomer and the kings who were with him. Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was the priest of God Most High. So the one who escaped is there. So he is the one that informs Abram. So immediately he arms his 318 servants and was joined by Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre, the chieftains who owned the district around Hebron. So this kind of tells you, remember before what I talked about Abraham, the type of person that he is. And so hopefully I'm going to get there today. I'm going to talk about Eliezer, Abraham's talk with God, and how by Abraham's example and the way he lived his life and the faith that he had, how he was such a great man, a good father, a good husband, a good brother, a good son, a good uncle, and that by him being so good and being so faithful that he facilitated the joy in the life of everyone around him. And as a tribal leader, having his own group of men, his own family, and those that followed him, he was able to show himself to be the type of person, a leader, that others around him, even though they're of no relation to him, that they would actually join him in rescuing his nephew Lot. And so they followed in pursuit of Chedorlaomer and his allies. And so this, in my opinion, is representative of the type of person that he was. So before I talked about Abraham, a lot of times you see a picture. I looked online. I was trying to find something good that would more replicate the type of man that Abraham was. He looks old, but you can tell he's kind of studly looking right there in that photo, in that picture. But you know, he was. So even though he was in his 70s, he was a very, very strong man. But when you look at him going after these people, so in doing, again, a lot of reading, Kettelmer and his group, which was common, that their victory more than likely made them careless. All right, so they were so happy with all the spoils that they had received. They're probably feasting on their bands, on all the stuff that they received. They were laden with so many spoils. They had captives that they were kind of straggling and out of order. So reading about other battles that occurred, which is a common thing. So the tribes, they would, when they weren't farming or being doing animal husbandry type stuff, when they weren't actually growing and raising anything, they were fighting. And this is a common thing. So you look at same thing with, if you look at Greek warfare, a lot of times the early Greeks were farmers and they were soldiers. And so when they weren't farming, they were fighting. When they weren't fighting, they were farming. And same thing here in the Middle East. A lot of times it's the same thing. There were certain seasons where men would go to war, and they would fight, and they would run around the desert and do their thing or whatever as Bedouins and tribes. And then when they weren't doing that, they were at doing the farming thing, the animal husbandry. And so there are stories that are written about other events in which they would attack another tribe, and tribes would tell stories about the careless ones who were so gladdened by their conquest that they basically allowed themselves to be attacked, so let their guard down. Basically, that's what they did. And so they're probably staggering out of order, but they were certainly ignorant of any impending danger that was going to come. So Abraham, again, goes back to him being a great warrior, a great person. Not only was he able to raise his own family and everything else and be the chieftain, head of his tribe, but he knew how to engage in warfare. And so he divided his force, and he ambushed Kettelmer and all his Confederates in the dead of night, and they likely probably attacked from several different sides at the same time, and they killed lots of them. And so in verse 18, we read that then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought a bread of wine. My thing is like, what's up with that, man? I mean, this is a far different scene occurs, and it's obviously significant meaning here, because in my Bible, God Most High is in bold. It's in bold and in black. And so I did some more research and reading about Melchizedek, and this guy basically appears like a meteor suddenly, unannounced, unexpectedly, mysteriously, and then he just suddenly disappears, and there's no more mention of him. And so, but amid the abundance of geological details of that period, I found absolutely nothing about where he came from, really. And so, but in the roll of kings and all their achievements, his name reigns high, but his birth and death otherwise remain unmentioned. Any comments? All right. So I'm going to go on to Genesis chapter 15. I'm going to read verse 1. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision, saying, "Do not be afraid, Abram. I'm your shield, your exceedingly great reward." So I'm breaking that down. I was like, well, what would Abraham have to be afraid of? I mean, he just had a major conquest, a major fight, a major battle. People, when he needed them, they came to his aid. But anyway, the commonality of this area was that he had just won a significant battle, but his victory might expose him to their vengeance. I mean, they might want to go after him, and maybe that's what he was thinking about, that people around him would be jealous. And that was the fear that he had when he went to Egypt, right? That he was so big and so powerful and so rich and wealthy that his wife might be taken, right? They might kill him for his wife. And also, he was a stranger in a strange land with no other possessions than a promise that God had given him, right? And so he didn't have a son to pass on his inheritance to. And in these circumstances, God came to Abraham in a vision, Okay, and basically told if I say Abraham, and I meant it's Abram at this point in time, but if I say Abraham, you know what I mean. But he tells him, don't be afraid, and assures Abraham that he is his shield and his exceeding great reward. And this meant that God was Abraham's defense from everything. And so Abraham could take that with faith and joy. All right, and verse 2, but Abraham said, Lord God, what will you give me, seeing I go childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus? Now, do you know who Eliezer is? Okay, so you probably do, you just don't remember his name. So here Abraham doesn't respond in doubt, but he responds in a language, a question about his childless state. And so at this moment, it seemed that Eliezer is his only heir, okay? But God assures him that that is not the case. So Eliezer, this dude right here, is the guy that went with Abraham probably on that raid, right? So when he raided those guys, they conducted an ambush. They rescued Abraham's nephew. He's also the oldest heir. Say again, sweetie? He's oldest servant. Excuse me. Thank you. You're right. So he's oldest servant. So when he is his oldest servant, and this is the dude that Abraham entrusts to go find a bride for his son Isaac, right? So this man, and again, so remember we went all the way back. We talked about the pagans and the whole 9 yards, right? So Abraham came from pagan world, a world of pagan. So the Bible, this part focuses on Abraham and his family and what's going on. But Eliezer is again an example of who Abraham is. This man was such a great person, a good man, that even his servants followed. And his servant, when he goes out to get a bride for Abraham, when he's very old, Abraham sends him out and trusts him to go out and find a bride. The man stops and prays to God, right? So this is obviously, in my opinion, by the example of Abraham, that Abraham left him from the time that he was, well, somewhat younger, to the time when he was an old man and died and trusted Eliezer. So Eliezer, by Abraham's example, Eliezer continued, he believed himself in God, and that he actually had enough faith that he prayed to God that he would choose the right wife for his son, for Abraham's son Isaac. And that's who this guy is. So at this point in time, it was a common thing to have your servant, if as entrusted as he was, for him to be the heir. And Abraham was probably thinking that at that point in time, and also, obviously, because of his age. So in verse 6 of 15, and he believed in the Lord, and he accounted to him for righteousness. So Abraham believed in God, and he counted to him for righteousness. This remark stands solitary in the narrative as to call attention to the fact that Abraham not only had faith in God's word, but trustfulness in Jehovah, and he had faith without seeing. So I have 10 minutes? Yes, we. Mm-hmm. 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 Their cities are built up areas. Yeah, yes. So he lived in a godless country, right? Right. Mm-hmm. Right. 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 Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. 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 Hmm. Right. Hmm. Right. 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 Yeah. So that's absolutely true. So the thing, so I'm not doing a very good job, I don't think, of describing the significance of Eliezer. So um, the Middle East, they have slaves. Africa, they have slaves. They're not slaves like we think of slaves, or servants as we think of servants. There's been plenty of writings. If you want some, I've got references I can tell you. But these people, it was a common in this time for your oldest servant to be the benefactor or to be the beneficiary when the master died, which is common. There's been a lot of writings where people who, like for example, the Brits and the French, when they move in these areas, they would get so frustrated with these people that rule the villages because in order to meet the king, they would have to meet with the servant or the slave. And these people, in some cases, there's writings where they actually fed their slaves by hand, the king himself. And these slaves weren't like what we think today. They were the servants weren't like what we think today as far as slavery in America, but they were highly regarded. They were teachers, they were educators, they were caretakers, they were farmers, they were warriors. They facilitated the lives of the person they served themselves. He was the oldest. I think later on, and if I'm not accurate about that, you correct me, but when he goes to Isaac, he is considered the eldest, the oldest servant, and that person is Eliezer. Um, so if I'm not right about that, you make sure to tell me, and I'll be okay. All right. So verse 15, chapter 15, verse 17 to 21. God confirms um, his, his promise. Is that okay? All right. I want to touch up on one thing real quick. So I'll talk to you, Jay, but this one part that I had great difficulty with, but I was able to find the details, and just real quick. So we talk about Abraham being in deep sleep in chapter 15, verses 12 through 16. And so God informed him of the future 400 years. And then he talks about the fourth generation. All right. So the 400 years, an approximation, is an approximation because in Galatians it talks about 430 years. So I was just real quick. I was doing a lot of research and reading. I've got some books and mostly online. And I don't know if this is accurate or not, but the 400 years is from the time that when God talked to Abraham, potentially. I'm not, don't tell, I'm just giving you some ideas. But then in Galatians, we talk about the 430 years. It basically is referencing from when Abraham first left Ur of the Chaldees and that whole time period. And then it also talks about the four generations in verse 16, which I found out were Levi, Kohath, Amram, and Moses. Now, in all the reading I was doing, it was like there's all these different things, and it's hard to figure that out. But just real quick, the four generations are considered children of Moses since Moses didn't enter the promised land. And Kohath was one of the original 70 Hebrews to come to Egypt and is the grandfather of Moses. Now this comes from Genesis chapter 46, verse 11, and talks about the sons of Levi. So that's number one, right? So that's the first generation. Then he had sons Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. Okay, so then Kohath in Exodus 6:18, who's the son of Levi, he had sons, and they were Amram, Izhar, Hebron, and Uzziel. So Kohath lived 133 years. So you got Levi and Kohath. Kohath's son, Amram, A-M-R-A-M, married his father's sister, right? So that's why he's named as the third. So, and his father's sister, Jochebed, who bore him, Aaron, and Moses, that being the fourth generation. Does that make sense? Well, it didn't make sense to me, so that's why I had to do all this research. But anyway, so that's it. All right, thank you.